Joker, Folie Deux is a musical thriller directed by Todd Phillips from a screenplay he co-wrote with Scott Silver. Based on the DC Comics character, the film serves as a sequel to 2019's Joker, which became the first R-rated film to cross over $1 billion at the box office, and until this year was the only film to have done so. Joaquin Phoenix reprises his role as Arthur Fleck, with Lady Gaga joining the cast as Lee Quinzel. The plot follows Arthur Fleck, who is now institutionalized at Arkham, awaiting trial for his crimes as Joker. While struggling with his dual identity, Arthur stumbles upon true love in the form of one Lee Quinzel. This review will be spoiler-free. In the lead-up to the release of the first Joker film, the hype was so intense, you'd think that it was the second coming of Jesus or something. It wasn't. In fact, it turned out to be a highly derivative film that provided only a shallow examination of mental health. However, it received great praise from audiences and the critics didn't mind it either. Since its release, I've come around on it a lot. I never disliked it, but I think it plays better for me now that I have accepted that it is a watered-down version of Martin Scorsese films like Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. You can feel that the film comes from a genuine place creatively. It is stylishly directed by Todd Phillips, and the character of Joker is expertly brought to life by Joaquin Phoenix in a well-deserved Oscar-winning performance. When I heard that Joker 2 was going to be a musical with Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, I sat up and really took notice. I thought that this was a bold and interesting direction to take a sequel, the likes of which you wouldn't normally get from such a big property. This had so much promise and seemed to give the film purpose, and the trailers looked amazing once they started rolling out. I love musicals, and the first film feels like one at times, just without the songs of course, so it didn't seem like a stretch to me. The musical premise and bad reviews that came out of the Cannes Film Festival really killed the hype for this film, but I held out hope. Making the sequel to the highest-grossing R-rated movie of all time a musical seemed like something the Joker himself would do. Unfortunately, it turned out to be something that Arthur himself would do, in that it was as if the writers were telling a bad joke, one that is on us, complete with a shockingly bad ending as its punchline. As for the things I liked here, the cinematography by Lawrence Sher is gorgeous to look at. Much like the first film, blue and green tones are dominant, but there is a lot of striking red due to Harley Quinn's outfits. The camera angles are not very interesting, but I don't really need them to be. The film is nice to look at, and that is worth being grateful for when it comes to a big budget comic book film, as most Marvel and DC films are really badly shot. We all saw that shot in the trailer where Harley draws a smile on the glass with lipstick and Joker moves his head to a spot where he can smile and it matched his mouth shape. That was fantastic. You get tiny moments like that throughout the film, so it is clear that there is some fuel in the tank. There just isn't a story on the page, not one worth telling anyway. The performances by Phoenix and Gaga are very passionate. The scene where they first meet was really great. It is just them conversing, and I was transfixed, keen to see where their relationship would go. Their first kiss in front of the projector is another great shot that would be destined to become iconic had this film received praise from audiences. That's where my praise ends for the film, which is a shame because there are a few sequences that are well directed independent of one another. I say independent because once assembled into a full piece, nothing really comes together. The editing is questionable, but it really all comes down to the script. It's a mess. If we are going to blame anyone with our limited knowledge of the production, we have to blame Warner Brothers. The first film was conceived as a standalone, but it made over $1 billion, so of course the studio were going to push for another one. The budget is much larger this time around because I imagine they had to throw a lot of money at Phillips and Phoenix to return. The film certainly doesn't have the kinds of insane special effects to justify a $200 million budget. There was clearly no story left to tell, at least for Todd Phillips. He just doesn't know what to do here. That being said, he is still being paid millions of dollars, so I think it's fair to shift some blame his way as well. It is painfully clear that once they had to come up with their own story that wasn't based on 1970s and 1980s Martin Scorsese films, they just couldn't. Sure, Todd Phillips helmed the first film quite well, but his only other notable credits are the Hangover films. I shouldn't be surprised, then, that this was such a failure. The story not only contradicts some details from the end of the first film, but it spends way too much time in Arkham State Hospital, as we watch the guards bully Arthur. Brendan Gleeson is great, but these guards got way too much screen time. Am I supposed to feel sympathy for Arthur because they like to push him around? I am unsure as to what the intention is here. The first film competently handled the sympathetic aspect of Arthur's character, because the whole film was from his perspective. You were never quite sure what was in his head and what was real. They built his character as a broken man who lives in a world that doesn't understand or care for him. He is lost and in need of love. He becomes increasingly more impulsive and angry, which leads to him becoming more powerful. All along the way, you wish that he would stop, because you understand his insecurities. Once we open into the second film, that is all gone. He has murdered multiple people by this point, and the audience no longer feels sympathetic towards him. When I witness him being bullied by the guards, I have no sympathy. Sure, the guards are not doing their job correctly, but I still see Arthur as pathetic at this point. This film reminded me of Quantum of Solace, which felt like DLC to Casino Royale. The story had already been told, but then we got a largely pointless tying up of loose ends in the form of a whole entire film. Joker 2's pacing is slow, but I was on board in the first act, as well as the second, albeit to a lesser extent. The film didn't grab me in its opening sequence, but I had goodwill going in. The chemistry between Phoenix and Gaga is really strong, and I liked their scenes together in the institution. Unfortunately, Lady Gaga is wasted overall. Her motivations are never really made clear, and she doesn't do a lot outside of the musical numbers, which are extremely jarring. The film is a jukebox musical. You get classic jazz songs from the 1930s through to the 1960s, but even though I like quite a few of the original versions of the songs, I don't think they were well chosen, as many of them sounded too similar and were really performed in a boring way. They just weren't arranged with any kind of new flavour. None of the songs chosen felt like they strung together any kind of narrative or pushed the story forward. In a musical, the songs are supposed to tell the story, even when they aren't written to do so. Moulin Rouge is a jukebox musical and provides an example of telling the story with your songs. Lady Gaga is a great singer, but it doesn't seem like she was given much direction here. As while Phoenix sings in the way that you would imagine Arthur singing, Gaga just sounds like Gaga. When the musical sequences are more abstract, they are more engaging. There is one on a roof and one in a courthouse. They are the only ones that immediately come to mind. They were more visually interesting than the others, most of which are actually happening. There was great potential to have the love story between Joker and Harley play out in Joker's head as musical sequences, and the song choices would help to push their romance forward, but they go out of their way to state that they are often singing in real life, which takes away the disorienting psychological element that worked well in the first film. Every time they started singing, it just feels awkward, and you know you're about to lose another 3 minutes and for no story progression. And it's not always clear which songs are actually being sung in the film or are being sung in one's imagination. One of my favourite subgenres is the courtroom drama. I love films like Primal Fear, and was hoping that this would be on a similar level. Not only does it fail as a sequel and as a musical, but as a courtroom drama as well. The courtroom scenes are boring. Once again, you get flourishes of fun here, mostly thanks to Phoenix's performance throughout, but the dialogue is nowhere near as strong as it needs to be to pull off the tension. One of the best scenes was when Gary Puddles was called to the stand. Clearly emotional, he explains the events of the first film and how they have changed him. He says that Arthur was the only person that treated him with any respect and didn't treat him like he was different because he is a dwarf. You see how upset this makes Arthur. He traumatized the one person that related to him and looked up to him. There was great drama in that scene. Every time the story would throw me a curveball, I would get excited. There are a few things that happen in the courtroom during Acts 2 and 3 that put you at a standstill. All of a sudden, you have no idea what direction the story is going to go in. What really annoyed me is that every time this would happen, it would just fizzle out into nothing. It would squander its own potential. So many story beats echo the real-life story of Ted Bundy. And for what reason? It just felt lazy. I can just watch the Zac Efron film Extremely Wicked if I want to see that. I predicted elements of the ending which is disappointing because I found the ending to be mean-spirited and largely meaningless. There were elements of the ending that didn't even make sense. One of the biggest sins of the film is that it is tedious. I was bored for a lot of it. The Arthur/Joker character is never pushed forward and we don't learn anything new about him. There is nothing you can get from this movie that you can't get from the first one aside from Lady Gaga, who is wasted anyway. Of course, Harley Quinn is not well written. If you remove the songs, she does almost nothing. However, Lady Gaga gives a career-best performance. She puts a lot into this role. She really sells it. She is fantastic. Joaquin Phoenix isn't given much new to do outside of the music, but once again, he really goes for it, and he is fantastic also. There is a meta element to the narrative, themes of how we sensationalize Joker as audience members and how we should not. This is why a lot of Ted Bundy's story is used as a framework, I think. He was sensationalized by the media and the public when his trial was televised. I don't appreciate the message. I should be able to enjoy watching a villainous character in a fantasy on screen. That doesn't mean that I agree with his actions. That doesn't mean that I idolize him. I don't need the meta commentary personally. The film doesn't really have anything to say. It feels like a big middle finger to the studio. I'm all for giving the middle finger to studios, but you still have an obligation to fans who are spending their hard-earned money to go see this film. I don't know what they were thinking. They have had years to work on this film. What style of musical were they going for? The posters you see on the walls don't reflect the style, and the song choices are from different eras, and don't push the story forward. Arthur Fleck doesn't seem to laugh uncontrollably as much as he used to, regardless of medication. Harvey Dent did nothing for me here. Lady Gaga was such an inspired choice, and they done her so dirty with this material. She was so uninteresting and yet could have easily been the opposite. She doesn't even really feel like Harley Quinn, not the version that I'm familiar with anyway. What I think they should have done here is made Harley Quinn the protagonist. That would have been interesting. Make Joker the supporting character. We have already explored Joker's psyche. There isn't much left to do there. By focusing on Harley's perspective, we could have explored the fantasy of a crazed fan, willing to change themselves for someone they look up to. We could question if the romance is real, because we are unsure if it is in her head. The musical sequences would serve as a way to push the romance forward, detaching it from reality. However, you could still ground the romance in the way that this film does, in that Joker and Harley are two lost individuals that can relate to one another. They find each other and can see each other on the inside. I think that could be a pretty good movie. Just shift the perspective of the characters and define Harley's motivations more. As it is, who was this film for? That's my question. The first film is so iconic that I can see this becoming iconic as a failure. This has to be one of the biggest failures in modern Hollywood history. It is bombing at the box office and seems to have disappointed almost everyone. What is possibly more likely than it becoming an iconic failure is that it will just be largely forgotten with time.